evening and welcome to Reaching Across the Aisle, a conversation with Tony Hall and Bob Taft. I am Mario, the president of the League of Women Voters of the Greater Dayton area. And before I get into more introductions, because this is Dayton and after all we have 24 hours or 15 minutes, tornado warnings. So we have checked with the building. If, God forbid, the sirens go off, there are 2 restrooms here, right behind this wall. I've checked them out, they're not all that big, but there are 2 stairwells, one through that brown door off to the side, and the other one is right through the double doors. There's a long interior corridor as well as a stairwell.
And there's a kitchen that we went to last time. There was so we could probably between all of those, we can probably get the kitchen has no windows either. So
perfect.
Unless the building lifts off.
Yes, we don't want to be Dorothy again. Okay, during these highly partisan times, it can be difficult to find common ground. Tonight, Ambassador Tony Hall and Governor Bob Taft will discuss the art of working across party lines to drive positive change. First, however, I'd like to introduce Nancy McHugh, the Executive Director of the Fitz Center for Leadership and Community, who has graciously agreed to allow us to use this beautiful facility this evening. Thank you.
Welcome to the Fitz Center. The story behind how the Fitz Center came to land in this space is, I think, an interesting one. From what I gather, Mike Parks went to President Eric Spina, Mike Parks from Dayton Foundation, and said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if UD built a building that the Fitz Center and and Dayton Foundation and Dayton Development Coalition could all be in together, and it was right on the edge of campus?" And Tony was like, "That's a pretty good idea." And it happened, and there's free parking, which, I've discovered in my 10 months here at University of Dayton, that having places to get parking where you don't have to get a pass is a really valuable thing. Yeah. So we are prime territory here. We also are at the intersection of a lot of things that are really valuable. We have this view of downtown, we have the view of the new Roger Glass Art Center, we have the view of the river. The Fitz Center, we are in some ways the front porch, University of Dayton's front porch to the community, but we're also really sort of, interstitial, really intertwined with the community in a lot of different kinds of ways. In the Fitz Center, one of the things that we do is we walk with and between communities to partner with them to move forward shared goals and community identified goals. And we take that really seriously, that community members, community organizations are the starting points of those conversations, and we think about the ways in which we can mobilize our resources in partnership with communities to move forward those goals. The other thing we do, and both of these things are really in the legacy of Brother Ray Fitz, which is we are conveners. We bring together different groups of people. We put people together in situations in which they might not find each other typically, and then we have conversations, we generate ideas, we do solution generation, and we implement things. So one of the things I find so wonderful about what we're doing here today is we're having those conversations in a time in which news reports like to tell us how difficult it is and how divided Americans are. Yet if you look at, there was a study that came out of Vanderbilt, it was on the news yesterday that said 80% of Americans can agree upon a whole set of core values and core ideas and core ways of moving forward. That for the most part, through a very large and broad center, there's lots of places for conversations. So we're here today to have those conversations and to think about how that looks productive in an environment that has told us for a while that can't happen. So I'm really excited to have these 2 great leaders here to help us do that. And welcome to the Fitz Center on 1401 South Main Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you again for hosting us this evening. Before I introduce our moderator, I would like to recognize other special guests and elected officials. Peggy Lehner, Mayor of Kettering. Jill Hall, Kettering City Councilwoman. Montgomery County Engineer. Janet Collier, publisher of the Dayton Daily News and a League of Women Voters Dangerous Dayton. Lewis, Director of Hall Hunger Initiative. I'd like to also recognize our League of Women Voters board members who have joined us this evening. Peggy Barry, David Bodery, Keely Guston, Diane Herman, Sandy McHugh, and Mary Robertson.
Yay.
So before I go on with introductions, I'd like to share a connection. I first met Governor Taft when I was the administrative assistant at Kids Voting, and he was Secretary of State. Kids Voting was a program which allowed students to go to the polls and cast their vote with their parents in order to get them used to going to the polls and casting their vote. He signed off on that initiative, which allowed us to go to the local boards of elections to get permission to have a table at the polls for students. Interestingly enough, Kids Voting was brought to Dayton by one of its founders, Max Jennings, when he became editor of the Dayton Daily News. That job launched my life in Dayton, and well, here I am. So now on to our moderator, Ashley Bedard, the editor and chief content officer for Cox First Media. She is an award-winning journalist and writer who joined the Dayton Daily News 10 years ago. She launched the website Dayton.com in 2015 and has led the Dayton Daily News digital news team since 2020. In 2016, she was named the Newspaper Association of America's Top 30 Under 30. Ashley will lead the conversation, and you will have some time to ask questions as well. Please write your questions on the cards provided at the registration table. League members, ladies, raise your hands, are going to collect. Oh, lots of them, thank you. They will collect the questions, and they will be presented to Ashley. So, our guest this evening. Tony Hall, 3 times nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, is a leading advocate for hunger relief programs and improving human rights conditions around the world. He served the 3rd District of Ohio in the U.S. House of Representatives for almost 24 years, the district's longest-serving representative in history. While serving in the House of Representatives as a Democrat, he was invited by President George Bush to serve as the United States ambassador to the United Nations agencies for food and agriculture. In 2015, Ambassador Hall founded the Hall Hunger Initiative to collaborate with community partners to create a just and equitable food system in the Dayton region. Bob Taft began his career in public service as a Peace Corps volunteer, working as a school teacher in Tanzania, East Africa, after graduating from college. He served as an elected official in Ohio for 30 years as a member of the state legislature, a county commissioner, Ohio Secretary of State, and served as governor of Ohio between 1999 and 2007.
I didn't learn enough. I should.
As governor, he focused on improving schools, reforming Ohio's tax system, attracting advanced high-paying jobs, helping communities clean up polluted sites, and provide better recreational opportunities for the residents. Former Governor Taft is currently a distinguished research associate with the University of Dayton, teaching political science courses and working with state and federal internship programs. Ashley?
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here tonight. It's really great to see so many faces out here joining us for this conversation. And it's really a privilege for the Dayton Daily News to be a part of convening this important conversation. So I'd like to begin our discussion tonight by asking each of our panelists, why did you decide to dedicate your life to public service?
In 1964, I graduated from college, and I was drafted. And it was during the Vietnam War, and I was on my way to Quantico, to officers candidate school. I was going to be a second lieutenant, and before I went there, I had to have a physical. And in my college days, I played football at college, and I had fractured my back. I hadn't realized how bad it was. And when they did the physical, as a result of the draft, they saw that I had to have an operation. So I had to have a spinal fusion on my back in 1964, and they said, "You're not draftable." And I was given a classification. It was, in those days, was called 1Y. I don't know if they still have that classification, but anyway, I felt that I wanted to give a couple years to my country, and I too went into the Peace Corps like Bob did. I went to Thailand, and I was a teacher, and I taught in a vocational high school. And it really kind of turned my life around. I never lived with poor people, and I grew up in
We're going to check to see if the microphone is working.
Yeah, it needs to be turned up. Or closer. Well, now it's working.
Try it again, please.
Do I have to? Wow. Do I need to start again? Anyway, I was in Thailand, and in Dayton, Ohio, I grew up in a fairly affluent family, and I never lived with the poor, and I didn't know a lot about them. But in Thailand, I lived very poor, and I took my showers out of a bucket. Spoke Thai language. Matter of fact, I still speak Thai today. It's interesting how when you're young and you learn language, when you're young, you keep it. And it really taught me how to kind of get away from myself. When you're young, you're kind of really into yourself. It really helped me a lot. And I learned a lot about the United States through the eyes of other people, how other people in other countries looked at the United States. And from that experience of living there for a couple of years, it really taught me a lot about myself, taught me a lot about my country, and from that standpoint, I thought, public service looks pretty good to me. I want to try it. So I think the Peace Corps really had a lot to do with it.
Thank you. Governor Taft, how about you?
So first, let me just say that that's pretty loud. I want to thank the League for hosting this and for all the work that you do to inform voters. It's really very important work. No one does a better job than all of you in that regard. It's a great honor to be here with Ambassador Hall. And by the way, we are exactly the same generation. He was born 8 days after I was. We just figured that out. But as I was growing up, of course, I was aware that my family had been involved in public service for a number of generations, but I really took my own path. And when I was in college, John F. Kennedy was president, and talked about, not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And he formed the Peace Corps. And that inspired me to take advantage of that opportunity. And I went to the country of Tanzania and taught school for 2 years. And I had many of the same experiences, Tony, that you just shared, and learned about a whole different lifestyle, a whole different part of the world, and became interested in, how can the United States help countries develop and grow and prosper and create more opportunities throughout the world. So I decided to study that. I got a master's degree in public affairs, focusing on international development, but really kind of learning about the whole arena of public policy. Joined the U.S. Foreign Aid Program, USAID, and went to Vietnam for 2 years. When I got back to the United States after that, I felt disconnected to my own country, because that was a period when we had assassinations, we had riots, all hell was breaking loose, and I felt really out of touch. So I decided to make a shift into state and local government. Looked around the country. There was a reform governor coming in the state of Illinois, a Republican governor named Dick Ogilvy. He created a Bureau of the Budget to help him manage state government. I was fortunate to get a job with them, and I worked there 3 years and really fell in love with state government and public policy and all, school policy, higher education policy, transportation, children's services, mental health, mental retardation, transportation, all the different aspects of what state government does. It's kind of opened up a whole new, front for me, and I became really interested in that just from a public policy standpoint. So when Governor Ogilvy, I think he was too honest. He wasn't reelected in Illinois. Also passed a tax increase, but at any rate, came back to Ohio and got involved in politics in Cincinnati, my hometown, and spent the next 30 years as an elected official, mostly in state government, but also in local government as a county commissioner. I really developed a passion for state government and what it can do, and so I decided to dedicate my career in that way. I learned that I could tolerate, I love the public policy, I learned I could tolerate politics and get along. I don't know how you feel about that, Tony, but anyway, that's my story.
Thank you. This next question, I would like both of you to talk a little bit about what's different about today's political climate versus 20 to 30 years ago.
Well, I think what's different is that, number one, 30 years ago, it cost thousands of dollars to run for office. Now it costs millions. Money has changed everything. I think number two, at least among legislators, among congressmen and senators, 30 years ago, members of Congress lived in Washington. They didn't live in their district. And that's important to know, because when members live in Washington, they get to know each other. And their families know each other, their children know each other. They go to dinner with each other, they travel together, they play cards with each other, and it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican, you make friends, you get to know each other. And that does not happen today. Members of Congress, they go to Washington normally on a Tuesday morning, and they come back on a Thursday night or a Friday morning. And they don't know each other. I would say those are the two biggest things that has really changed. The other thing that's changed is that today, I was reading what former Speaker Paul Ryan said. He said that a lot of legislators today are entertainers. They do one-liners, they brand things, and they don't set policy, they don't take the time to really work their way up to do things. To be a good legislator, you have to really spend time at it. But so many of the legislators are entertainers. They brand so much that what happens is that some of the things they do are so outrageous, both on the left and on the right, to the point where they put themselves in a position where they can't compromise. There's no compromising. And it's an absolutely crazy position they put themselves in. They don't want to work at getting the job done. And so and the fourth thing, of course, is social media has really changed. I mean, when I left Congress, we were just kind of getting into emails. I mean, we did everything by letters and phone calls.
I remember.
I mean, social media has absolutely changed everything.
Really second what Ambassador Hall said, but my dad was in Congress in the 1960s, and I think we really lost the capacity for bipartisanship on issues of major importance to the country. Back in the 1960s, we passed civil rights legislation. It was bipartisan. In the 1980s, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, collaborated on Social Security reform, tax reform, other issues. In the 1990s, President Clinton and Speaker Gingrich, who was really quite partisan, but they cooperated on a balanced, can you imagine a balanced federal budget? and welfare reform as well. And then I think for a moment, 9/11 brought us together, but it was just for a moment, very sadly. Although George W. Bush, early on, he did pass the No Child Left Behind bill, which is education, and Medicare Part D. Those were basically bipartisan pieces of legislation. Under the last two presidents, however, the only major bills that have passed have been partisan bills. One party passed those bills. Not much has passed of a major variety for that reason on the last couple of presidents. You had the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, under President Obama, and a tax reform passed under President Trump. So both were partisan bills. I've heard the term hyper-partisan. That's what we got today. Republicans are more to the right, or Trumpian. Democrats more to the left. The progressives. Both, if you look in Congress, both Democrat and Republican moderates are mostly gone, either defeated in primaries or retiring often to avoid a primary. So there are bipartisan bills that pass and you never hear about them, but those aren't usually the major issues that are facing the country. Issues like immigration reform or Social Security reform, there's just no progress on those because it requires bipartisanship, and it doesn't seem to exist. As you all know, probably the vast majority of districts are either heavily Republican or heavily Democrat, either because people sort themselves out that way where they live, or because of the way the district lines are gerrymandered. So the parties themselves seem more divided. They're divided on policy, but the only thing that unites the parties now is really what they're against the other party. That's the only thing. So it becomes a crime then to collaborate or partner with the other party, because that's what unites both parties, really. You're kind of dancing with the devil, and you're going to be criticized if you do that. Just one recent example, Senator Portman, who has worked across the aisle often, very bipartisan compared to many of his colleagues, he was involved, he was in a leadership role in passing the major infrastructure bill that just passed. We've got infrastructure issues, we've got bridges, we've got roads, all kinds of sewer plants, all kinds of issues that we have to address. That bill got passed, but he got criticized by almost every Republican that was running to succeed him. They criticized him for working in a bipartisan way on the infrastructure bill. That's where we are today, and it's pretty sad.
Yeah.
And I also, you talked about how a lot of these members of Congress perform, Tony, and I've heard the term like they're performance artists. They're not there to get stuff done. They're there to perform and build their social media list and raise money on social media. I don't know, go on the cable channels, stuff like that. I mean, I don't get it.
I don't get it either.
This conversation really lays the foundation for this next question. From your perspective, is the future of U.S. democracy threatened today? And if so, by what factors?
Absolutely. Democracy in America is threatened, in my opinion. It's scary. It scares me. I look at our country and I really worry about it. The first thing, and I go back to this, money. There's too much money being spent. The lobbyists, the special interest, absolutely, it's crazy. And I hate to use such a harsh term, but the money in politics today, it's almost a form of legal prostitution. And members of Congress have to spend, in order to raise the kind of money, just a regular, ordinary congressman has to spend at least 2.5 hours every day on the phone raising money in order to secure money for the next campaign. If he or she is spending 2.5 hours on the phone every day raising money, who's taking care of his job? He should be doing policy. He should be working for his constituency. He ought to be in Washington, doing his job. Money is killing democracy. The other thing that's hurting us, 19 states in this country have passed restrictive voting laws. I mean, if that doesn't hurt democracy, I don't know what does. I mean, when you restrict people from voting, it keeps minorities away, it keeps senior citizens away, it keeps all kinds of people away from the voting booth. 19 states now have passed laws on that. I could go on and on and on. Is democracy in jeopardy? It is. It is. There is such hate. I don't understand it, but I don't understand it. And I've never seen anything like it. It disturbs me. And I'm an optimist. I've always been an optimist.
Right, exactly.
But it very much disturbs me. And yes, democracy is in jeopardy.
Thank you.
I also would agree that our democracy is under threat, and I'll just mention a couple things. I was Secretary of State of Ohio, which means Chief Elections Official of Ohio, and back when I was Secretary of State, it was almost like a backwater. It was calm and placid. I think people trusted the results of the election. They had confidence in the legitimacy of the election results, and that is all. If you're Secretary of State today, you're going to get sued like every other week, and the controversy is just unbelievable. And that's dangerous to democracy, because people don't accept the election results, they don't accept the legitimacy of what happened, and the legitimacy of government, then who knows what's going to happen. All hell can really break loose. Of course, we had a direct attack on January 6th on the legitimacy of an election. And the fact that Donald Trump refused to accept the results and his efforts to overturn the results was really a specific and direct threat to the election system, to the legitimacy of elections. It just breeds more and more distrust in a very serious way. Fortunately, we had some people there, the Vice President, we had some Secretary of State, we had governors that stood up to that. And so, it didn't work, but it was a very specific and very alarming threat. I mean, nothing like that has happened in my lifetime that I can remember. So I think we have to figure out some way to get together on election. If we can't agree on the rules, the rules of the game, what can we agree on? So we've got to figure out some way to restore confidence in our elections process. That's very, very important. And then secondly, what I mentioned before is a threat, I believe, hyperpartisanship, and the refusal to work across the aisle, the inability to address the major issues that are facing the country. Because if you have government that is in total gridlock, government that's viewed as dysfunctional, then you're going to have a tendency towards an authoritarian leader that's going to come in and change things and crack heads. And we had a bit of that with Donald Trump, because the whole group of people wasn't really feel that their issues weren't being addressed. They felt by either party that was an opportunity, so they elected a person that won't come and break the china, didn't really care what the Constitution said, didn't understand what it said, didn't want to know what the Constitution said. And so when government doesn't work, when the parties don't work together to solve the problem, then I think that has the capacity to erode the fundamental institutions of our democracy.
Thank you. Now this is kind of another big part of this conversation tonight. Can you both give us an example of how you worked across the aisle?
I can give you a few examples, a number of examples. I'll give you two. The first one is Bill Emerson, a Republican congressman from Missouri. I was chairman of the Select Committee on Hunger, and he opposed the committee. He didn't think we should have a committee on hunger. He didn't think there were hungry people in the world or even in our country in those days. I'm going back 30, 35 years. And nice fellow, good man. I said, Bill, take a trip with me. I'm going to take you to Africa. I'm going to take you to the Congo, and I'm going to take you to Ethiopia. I'm going to show you something. And so I took him, and I took him to refugee camps. I took him to feeding camps. I showed him people that were malnourished and sick, and he was just absolutely, it touched his heart. He said, I never knew this. I never suspected this. He went home, went back to Missouri. He had one of those, his district was along the Missouri River, or the Mississippi River. And he said, you know, if there's hunger like this, there's got to be hunger in my district. And he became such an advocate for hungry people that he started his own food pantries, and he became such an advocate within the Republican Party on this issue that they named legislation after him. And the Good Samaritan Law, I don't know if you've heard of the Good Samaritan Law, but the Good Samaritan Law is when when you donate food from grocery stores, or you don't want to get sued. Well, that was his law. And there's also the Bill Emerson Act, which we're now using in Ukraine, where we have surplus food that we need to get rid of, because there are hungry people in the world. There's a lot of famines and stuff. We are giving a good portion of it now to Ukraine. It's called the Bill Emerson Act. Well, Bill Emerson, that's one. Number two is Congressman Frank Wolf and I. He's a Republican. His district is in Northern Virginia, and he and I have been friends for 40 years. And we took a trip to Sierra Leone together. And this issue is about conflict diamonds. And I became the author of a bill to stop conflict diamonds from coming into this country, which passed. It's now law today, not allowed to sell conflict diamonds in America. And we didn't know anything about conflict diamonds in those days. Conflict diamonds are diamonds that are mined mainly in Angola, Sierra Leone, and those countries they're mined, and they're not registered in the country. They're sold, and they're gathered by these rough bunches of revolutionaries, and then what they do is they trade into De Beers and Cartier, and the big jewelry companies, and it's just how they buy their arms and their guns, and they grow their armies, and they have these armies that terrorize people all over Sierra Leone. And Frank and I went to this refugee camp, and everybody there had their arms cut off, or their hands cut off, or their nose cut off. You ever seen anybody with their nose cut off? Their ears cut off? And they play this game is that what they do is they'd gather 100 men, and they'd say, we're going to cut off your hand, but you have to in order for you to live and get bandaged and get food, you have to run to the Miami Valley Hospital. And if you do that, we'll take care of you, we'll bandage you up. Of course, by the time they run there, they bleed out. This is how they would terrorize whole neighborhoods and cities, and they took over Sierra Leone. And I said, well, how did this happen? It happened through conflict diamonds. America bought 60% of all the conflict diamonds in the world. We bought them. And De Beers fought Frank and I as Republican and Democrat. We introduced the bill to stop it. And they fought us and said, we can't register these things. I said, sure you can. If you can register cheese, I mean, you go on a cheese store and wine store, you know where it came from. You certainly can do that with conflict diamonds. And we had a heck of a time trying to pass this in Congress, but we finally did. And conflict diamonds has now absolutely been stopped. And we would go as a Republican Democrat, and we would picket Tiffany and Cartier and De Beers, both in London and New York City. We passed that law, and that was done through Republicans and Democrats working together. We passed it in Congress. There are no more conflict diamonds come into this country. Well, at least we cut out 95% of it.
Thank you.
That's great. Terrific. So, I was elected by, first time I ran, I was elected by 52% of the vote as governor. Of course, I'm sure Tony knows this, I've never met anybody that voted against me. But, so 48% people did vote against me. But when I became governor, it was my thought that I should represent everybody in Ohio, all regions of Ohio, whether they're heavily Democratic or not. So every 2 years, in fact, it just happened in Ohio, they passed the state capital bill. Senator Lehner knows this very well, and has community projects in it for a lot of different organizations in Dayton. Got money from the community projects, part of the capital bill. So the legislature was all Republican. So for the most part, we could work Republican bills through, and we didn't need to go and get Democrat votes. But that capital bill, I made sure that Youngstown, Ohio, the first time I ran, they killed me. I mean, they just wiped me out. I probably got 30% of the vote in Youngstown. But none of the Republicans were representing Youngstown. So as governor, I'm going to make sure Youngstown gets represented in the capital bill. And so as a result, because of that approach, the capital bill was passed with almost every Democrat and Republican voting for it. And in fact, I believe the only building that's not at the state fair, and the state fair doesn't count because after you're governor, there's a tradition for some reason where they name a building at the state fair after the governor. That doesn't really count. And by the way, I was really anxious that they might name the hog barn after like having a lot of pork, whatever. But the only building that has my name on it is in Youngstown. It's called the Taft. They probably wiped it out by now since I'm not having a governor for it. It was called the Taft Technology Center. But that was my approach. We had other bills where, like, Clean Ohio program is still going on, and we put that on the ballot with a lot of Democrat votes because there were projects, throughout the state that would benefit Democrat districts and Republican districts. And in that bill, what we did is we really reached out to the mayors of Ohio, and most of whom were Democrat, and said, okay, from Clean Ohio, what do you need? And they said, we need dollars, Governor, to clean up these abandoned industrial sites. So we can turn them around, because business won't do it because they're all contaminated and it's very expensive and risky and so forth. And so we put into that Clean Ohio program, dollars to clean up brownfields. And so that's one strategy that we used to get a lot of Democrat votes for that. The Third Frontier Project was high-tech, benefited all parts of the state. We would get Democrat votes on that. We had a Rebuilding Ohio Schools plan to rebuild schools all over Ohio, and we started with the poorest school districts, and we had an urban part for that too. So that bill also, so a number of bills did get bipartisan support, even though we didn't usually have to because I had Republican majorities working for me.
Thank you. So you did you both answered this question in kind of various ways, but I did want to put it to you a bit differently. Do you have a piece of legislation that required bipartisan support that you're most proud of? And if so, what was that process like, and what sacrifices were necessary in order to improve that process?
I can start if you want. Want me to start?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm ready.
You're on, man.
I'm ready because my education policy advisor is in the audience, Susan. And Susan knows this story very well, but very late in the term, when I had in my last term, when I had almost zero political capital, we proposed a bill to adopt a more rigorous core curriculum for high school graduation, more English, more math, more science. And it was very challenging to pass that bill. We didn't have enough Republican votes for it. And so, even though the Republicans were in the majority, so we really reached out to Democrats in the House and the Senate. We invited a number of Democrats to breakfasts at the governor's residence, where we brought in national experts to explain why a more rigorous core curriculum would benefit students all over the state, including students from low-income and minority backgrounds. And we also had to make some compromises that Democrats wanted. If we're going to do this, more math and science, well then we need to put money in there to help school districts to build their teacher capacity to teach these courses, and also to recruit and retain good teachers, especially in science and math. So we had to add money into the bill for that purpose, and as a result, we did get some significant number of Democrat votes. State Representative Joyce Beatty, now Congressman Joyce Beatty from Columbus, gave a strong speech in favor of that bill. Said this is the right thing. We need to do this. But we couldn't have passed that bill without those Democrat votes. We did. I don't know if it's a Democrat-Republican issue, but we did upset the physical education teachers across the state, as Susan remembers, because it must be the school district must have pushed back on this, but so we allowed to be excused from the PE requirement the state had at the time, athletes, marching band, and cheerleading coaching. So it destroyed the monopoly for PE. So we made it, including a guy here at Dayton, a professor at Dayton, he wasn't very happy with me about that. But she had to make a few compromises along the way to get the bill, but we got the bill passed, and it's pretty much still intact, isn't it, Susan, I think? And Susan did great work on that bill, by the way. A lot of work.
Thank you.
I think the thing that I was most proud of, and it wasn't a piece of legislation, it was a fast that I did. And I did a fast I didn't eat anything for 22 days. And what happened is that the Congress eliminated the Select Committee on Hunger, of which I was the chairman of. And I was so mad, so disappointed, because it was the only committee in the Congress that really dealt with the issue of hunger and poverty. And it was during the time of large deficits, and the Democrats and Republicans were together on it. They said to the American people, we've got to start doing something about the deficits, and we're going to take care of our own shop. We're going to start cutting things and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes in the legislative process, oftentimes they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater. They do crazy things. And this committee, the Select Committee on Hunger, was called by the New York Times the conscience of the Congress. I mean, we won all the awards, from the standpoint of passing legislation and those kind of things. It was a great committee. Anyway, I was so hurt, so disappointed. I went home that night and said to my wife, Jan, I said, I'm thinking about quitting Congress, because these people they don't care about these issues. You know, they don't. This is what I really love, and I don't know. What do you think? She said, did you ever think about a fast? And she was reading Isaiah 58, which is Old Testament fasting. She was with a bunch of women who had been discussing that. She said, did you ever think about going on a fast? So I said, no, I was thinking my wife might have been a little bit crazy. Anyway, we discussed it, thought about it, and to make a long story short, I announced a couple days later that I was going to go on a fast. And I told the Congress that I was sick and tired of them not caring about this issue. I knew I wasn't going to get my committee back because you've already eliminated it. And I was going to not eat anything. I was just going to drink water for a long period of time. And I didn't know how long it was going to be, but I was going to wait until something good happens. Oh my gosh. They thought I was nuts. And matter of fact, my staff thought I was nuts. And anyway, so I went on a fast, and I came home just the day that I announced I was going on a fast, and there must have been 22 TV cameras there and a whole bunch of news people, because this was unusual. Nobody in Congress ever in the history had ever gone on a fast like this. Chaminade Julienne, I had made a commitment like a month before that I would come and speak to their students, and I had told them that I was going on a fast that day, and they thought, that is really interesting. So they went on a fast with me for one day with their parents and the teachers.
Wow.
They fasted with me. And there just happened to be, I think somebody, I don't know if it was with the NBC or CBS, somebody big was following me around. So they reported it on national news. Eventually what happened was, they tell me that like 10,000 high schools fasted with me and 200 universities. Now they didn't fast 22 days, but they fasted a day or so. And of course, there wasn't one congressman that was with me, not one. And I was beginning to think, am I doing the right thing here? I mean, this looks kind of foolish. And I'm fasting. I'm fasting under God. I'm serious about this. And I'm fasting not to get my committee back. I'm fasting for the poor. I mean, I am really serious. And a lot of good things really started to happen. It was amazing. The thing that really got me to stop after so many things, and I won't tell you all the good things that happened, but the things that got me to stop was Bill Stanton, who was a former Republican congressman, was at the World Bank. He got a job after he was done running, being a congressman, Republican, and he had a key job at the World Bank. He said, Tony, we've been reading about your fast at the World Bank, and we've been reading about it in the New York Times, Washington Post, and networks have been, he said, it's just amazing. He said, we're having a major conference here. We're having world leaders, the Secretary General of the UN's coming, Jimmy Carter's coming. Come, we want you to make a speech. If you make a good speech about this fast and why, we might commit something to you. I want to make a speech. They gave me $100 million.
Wow.
They didn't give it to me. At least they wouldn't have given it to me. No, they committed $100 million to microcredit for women that went to India, Bangladesh, and all that money has been paid back. That money is now up to $500 million and still growing. It comes back, it goes out in forms of $100 to $150. The women form these jobs through microcredit, comes back, it's paid, 98% of it keeps getting paid back and back, and it keeps growing, growing, growing. That is what I'm most proud of. That.
So in your opinion, what can we do to be more engaged and civil as individuals?
I'll let you jump in.
It's an extremely civil order. So, you know, I think we're all experts on this topic, or all have an opinion about this, but it clearly starts at home, I think, with parents. You know, I think it's great if parents can take their kids to go vote with them. I think that's really a good idea, and talk to the kids about what it means to vote. Very important, and that's kind of what happened with kids voting. And I know Dave Ponens is here, and Dave and Doris were leaders in kids voting here in Dayton, and probably others of you were involved. And so that was a really good way to get kids engaged. I love fourth graders. I go in and I've got a little talk I give to fourth graders about William Howard Taft and the Taft family and voting and state government and so forth. And they are so receptive, they're so interested, they've got great questions. And so I think there's a fourth grade requirement when they talk about state government. And I think that's really a great thing. I'm not always sure what happens in high school, but I was always very impressed when teachers really asked, or maybe even required if they could, their students to get involved when it was a campaign year, asked their students to get involved in a campaign, whatever party, whatever candidate they would choose. I thought that was very good. I think, you know, as many kids as possible should be involved in debate or mock trial in high school. I'd like to see every kid doing that. When I was governor, I went to Girls State, Boys State. Those are American Legion programs where they get about 1,000 boys or 1,000 girls, and they all have roles to play and actually conduct a government right there, and that's really a good thing. Of course, the trick was if you go to Girls State, then you announce this afternoon I'm going to Boys State, then there's a wild cheers go up and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty wild. But this is really, I don't know why the microphone is ringing so much, but at any rate, University of Dayton does something that I think is pretty good and doesn't have not a lot of publicity, but every student who goes to the University of Dayton has to take Communications 100, which introduces the relationship between communications and democratic life in the United States. So they have to do different exercises where they appreciate how communication is important to achieving mutual understanding, you know, providing an opportunity to demonstrate effective and ethical dialogue. They actually engage in dialogue in this class on different topics. The students learn how to deliver complex information to non-experts, effectively advocate for a position, and critique the messages of others. Now this isn't, you know, it's not a magic bullet or anything like that, but I think it's a really great thing that UD does, and I think all colleges should do that. And I think it does improve the quality of the discourse, you know, in all classes throughout. I teach a course about the U.S. Congress. It's called Legislative Politics, and a lot of it's probably a little boring, but one of the most interesting things I do, best things I do, is at the end of the semester, I devote about 6 or 7 classes to this. I assign every student a specific member of Congress to role play on a committee that's trying to pass a comprehensive immigration reform law. And I put equal number of Democrats and Republicans on each committee. I appoint the chairman, I give them a menu of issues that they need to address, and then I give them, you know, 3 full class periods to address that issue. And if there's a student that I know leans a little left, I might give them a real conservative member of Congress, and vice versa. you know, but they really, they get into this and they really enjoy it, and usually they make some compromises, so they work out a piece of legislation, which, of course, I can use this issue every year because Congress never addresses it. And it's an interesting issue. It's a really important issue for the future of our country in terms of, you know, who can come here, and, you know, our population is growing, and are we going to be able to fill the jobs that need to be filled if we're going to grow and prosper and support Social Security and Medicare and so forth. And so that, I think, is a good way to try to approach it. None of those are, you know, magic solutions, but we just all need to do a lot more to get younger people involved and engaged in the civic and electoral and political life of their country and community.
Well, I was just listening to Bob, and I was thinking about his family. What an amazing family legacy. His family was, I mean, president, a senator, congressman, governor. I mean, what a legacy. Amazing.
Well, I feel grateful to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and you've been an amazing public servant.
Well, thank you so much, Tony.
You really have.
Thank you.
Taft family, it's just amazing the things that they have done, the positions they've had in this country. Wow, from the president all the way down. Anyway, what was the question?
So the question was, in your opinion, what can we do to be more engaged and civil as individuals?
Well, you know, I think this is an opportunity for somebody like the League of Women Voters, maybe the University of Dayton, maybe the Dayton Daily News, maybe some major businesses. I don't know. But I think that when's the last time that the politicians and legislators have been together on a retreat? You know, maybe they should go away for a week. Never come back. Maybe they should, you know, maybe go to, you know, our state parks for a weekend with their wives and their children.
Oh, boy.
And get to know each other. Play, have fun, play games, play golf, play cards, whatever. Get to know. Talk a little bit about policy, but most importantly, get to know one another. Maybe do that a couple times a year. I know that we used to do that in Congress. We would take train trips to like New York and Philadelphia, and we'd spend weekends together, and it was great. It was wonderful. We got to know each other really well. Members, legislators, and politicians, they don't know each other, and we certainly don't know each other across political lines. I think that's number one. I mean, this could be something maybe the League do, or the Daily News could sponsor. Politicians are notoriously cheap. They're not going to pay for it. So somebody has to sponsor this, to bring them together where they can have some fun, get to know each other. Because I do know this, that when people get together and they get to know one another, and they begin to be vulnerable, what happens is trust comes in. The other thing that, and kind of, you know, 6 and 7, the question, I was looking at the 7th question, they kind of go together in a way. 6 and 7, where, you know, what can we do to make things better? I think, you know, I think for legislators to get together and one of the things that I have seen that really works is with Bill Emerson, Congressman Bill Emerson and Frank Wolf. We prayed together every Tuesday at 4 o'clock. There's a small chapel in the Capitol. It's just for congressmen. The chapel's probably no bigger than from here to those chairs, and it's just for congressmen. And we would get together and pray together. And let me tell you something, when you pray together, it's kind of hard to get up and be mad at one another and start yelling at one another. And Bill Emerson and Frank Wolf and I, we passed a lot of legislation together. 2 Republicans and myself being a Democrat. And it's mostly because of that prayer group. This is one of the few things, the 2 things that I've seen that really, really work. Praying together and taking retreats together and traveling together and spending time with each other. And when you do that, after a while, it takes a while, after a while, you become vulnerable to one another. And you don't tell people what you discussed. Get to know each other. And there's a trust that comes through. And when the trust comes through is when you can really start to do things together. And it works, absolutely works. Second thing is we need people to run for office. Good people.
Yeah.
And, you know, Martin Luther said 500-600 years ago, he said, you know, we need to send our good people into the church. We need to send our best into politics. We are not sending our best into politics. We're sending clowns into politics. We're not sending our best. We're not sending the Bob Tafts. We're not sending the Emersons, the Frank Wolfs. So we need people to run for office that are good, that that are not moralizing for the fact that, you know, on the right or the left, but they're there because, not of their party, forget the party. They're there because they care for the country. This stuff about worrying about the Republican and Democratic Party is a bunch of crap. It is a bunch of baloney. We've got to have people that put the country first. And we're not seeing that. And we're not getting people that are, we've got to start getting our leaders to allow members to be able to vote their principles. And if they want to vote their principles, fine. These parties have got to start being, you know, more inclusive, and they're not. You vote against the party on your principles, I mean, these people will, you say your name and they'll spit. I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So you did kind of lead us into our last written question here, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. But first I wanted to give Governor Taft an opportunity to speak to kind of what you had talked about, which was specifically, you know, we did talk about a lot of the obstacles that prevent legislators from working together. How might we remedy that?
I think Ambassador Hall was just talking about something very important, is how do we attract the right kind of people into a higher, people who are willing to work bipartisan. The current system really does attract the extremes because the way it's set up, it kind of favors the election of extremes. It's driving both parties and candidates. On the left, on the Democrat side, more to the left, Republicans more to the right. There's a couple reasons for that. I mean, number one, the way these districts are drawn or gerrymandered, there are very, very few competitive districts left. In the last election, I think Ohio had 16 districts, something like that. One district was really competitive out of 16. And that's true across the country. About 80% of the districts in the House are not competitive districts. And so that means that the person who wins the primary is going to be the person serving in the U.S. House of Representatives in the Congress. I saw one analysis in 2020 that concluded, because of the way the district lines were drawn, and this is also where people live too. People are self-sorting and they want to live with either Republicans or Democrats, but at any rate, 2020, 83% of the U.S. House districts, the primary election determined who was going to win. That was really the only election. And in those primary elections, 10% of the eligible voters voted.
Right.
10%
Yeah.
of the eligible voters voted. So, those aren't really, those aren't really representative members in a sense. Even, if, you might, and then that's number one. Number two is that most states, like Ohio, whoever wins a plurality of the vote wins. In other words, you don't have to win a majority of the vote. So that means if you have 4 or 5 candidates, let's say it's an open seat, a lot of people want to run, attract good people in there, but the winning candidate may have 30% of the vote, or maybe even less of the vote. So, if in that case, 30% of the vote, even the members of his own party aren't really represented. In a district where whoever wins the primary is going to win the general election in November. Recent statewide primaries in Ohio and Pennsylvania, on the Republican side, because I've been following that, the winning candidate, I think in Ohio might have had 36%, and in Pennsylvania, 32% of the vote. This is the U.S. Senate primary. So, if the election is really the primary, then the members of Congress, they're worried. They're not worried about the other party. They're worried about an attack from their right flank or the attack from their left flank, and so that pushes them, that polarizes them, and pushes them apart, and much less willing to compromise. So how do you fix that? So one way, of course, is if you can figure out a way, which we haven't done in Ohio, obviously, to draw district lines. And I'm not an expert on this, but the only state I know that has got something that kind of is doing it is Iowa. And Iowa's a little easy because it's like 4 districts. But they gave the job to the staff of the legislature, and they told them, you cannot consider where any legislator lives, and you cannot consider the party voting patterns in any district. So you have to use, compactness and keeping local governments intact and that kind of thing. Those are the only criteria. They cannot use that in drawing those districts. It goes to the legislature. Legislature has to reject the districts 3 times before the legislature can take over. That hasn't happened so far. I don't know how they did that in Iowa, but they've done it. So that's one solution. But another solution, and this is really a little far out, and it's being done though in a few states like Washington, California, Nebraska, and Alaska, and that is to simply require that the winning candidate has 50% of the vote and eliminate partisan primaries. Currently, people don't realize this, but it's like inside baseball type thing, but you, the taxpayers, you're subsidizing the Republican Party and the Democratic Party primary. You're subsidizing that, because those are paid with public monies. But those are really party functions. Right. But anyway, eliminate partisan primaries, so you would have nonpartisan, anyone could enter. Everyone's in one big, sometimes people call it jungle primaries, Democrat, Republican, all together in the primaries. Then you take, like California's top 2 go on to November, and in Alaska, which is very interesting, it's the first time the top 4 go on to the general election. And then to make it a little more complicated, it's maybe too complicated, in Alaska, then they have ranked choice voting, where if there are 4 candidates, you specify 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the way you get to a 50%. So if nobody gets 50%, then you eliminate the lowest vote getter, and allocate their votes based on their second choice and so forth. So until you get one candidate with 50%. So the concept is, this is very, it's more experimental, but the concept is, and Maine does ranked choice voting too, you probably saw that, but the idea is that, if you're all in a primary together, you're not going to just want to appeal to one small faction or the Trump faction or something like that. You need to appeal more broadly. Or if you're in a ranked choice election, you don't want to alienate the other candidates. You want to try to get maybe their second choice if they're not for you. And so the idea is it brings people more together. And sometimes you might have, in California, like 2 Republicans coming through the primary, or 2 Democrats coming through the primary for the general election. And then those people, they have to appeal to the other party to get elected in that case. So I just think that it's very interesting. There's at least one national organization that's promoting this very energetically with funding. I think they helped get the Alaska passed. They're working in Missouri and Nevada to get something like this passed there. And I think it's an interesting idea. There's a professor at Ohio State who says this won't happen. But if Congress were just to pass a law that said that members of Congress must be elected by a majority vote, and then left it up to the states to experiment, like the laboratories of democracy, experiment with different concepts that might help. I just learned a few weeks ago that there is an national organization with some serious funding that is working towards this kind of reform. Now, no reform is a panacea. There's a waiting game but what we got now is a disaster. I mean, talk about clowns, Tony. This is what gets me so upset and interested in this idea. I mean, there are some of the people I see coming out of these primaries where there's 4 primaries, four or 5 candidates, and maybe just one happens to get the Trump endorsement, or one happens to be funded by some national PAC, super PAC, something like that. So it's very discouraging, and that's what I think discourages good people from running for office. In the first place, and we're losing a lot of the good ones. I mean, the people who are willing to work bipartisan. I'll just tick off the 5 Republican senators who have been really kind of problem solvers, pragmatic, get stuff done. They're conservative, but Senator Portman, Senator Blunt from Missouri, Senator Shelby from Alabama, Senator Burr from North Carolina, Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania, they're all not running this year. So God knows who's going to replace them. We'll see.
Thank you.
Ashley, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm Chris Corba. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters. Welcome. We are so happy to see you all here today. This has been perfect. I didn't meditate this morning. I feel so much calmer now after this. Mario said this was going to be soothing to our souls, and it has. It has soothed my soul. Absolutely. We are at about 8:17 right now, which this is just, it feels like it's flown by. We would like to have Ambassador Hall and Governor Taft answer some questions from the audience, though. We're going to try to keep it about 15 minutes or so. But if you have questions, league members who are willing to give you little cards, you've written your question on your card.
All right, we have questions. So, first question. Have we reached a critical moment in which term limits in Congress are needed? And if so, do you think it would help?
Well, let me just, I don't think it's worked in Ohio. We've had when the voters passed term limits in the 1990s, they were frustrated with Congress, and they voted term limits for Congress and for state legislature. And then the court said, no, states can't limit for Congress. So we were stuck with term limits for state legislators and not for Congress. But you can ask Senator Lehner, who would know this better than I, but I think we've lost a lot of really good talent and good leadership in the state legislature because of term limits. And I honestly don't see a lot of benefits. I mean, maybe you got someone that's staying too long or whatever, but But it was a problem when I was governor. We'd work with people in the legislature to get complicated legislation done, then they're out, they're gone. Who do you work with to get anything done?
Yeah.
And so I'm not a fan of term limits.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Ambassador Hall?
You know, we have some people in Congress that are senile. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not trying to be funny. I mean, they have been, some of them have been in there for 40 years, 45 years, and I can think of 2 right now. And there ought to be some way that they go. And maybe a senator or a congressman, there ought to be, I'm not for term limits where they serve 6 years and they have to get out. Maybe they can serve 18 years or something like that. There ought to be. But we have congressmen and senators that have served 40, 45 years, and their staff runs everything.
Yeah.
And they have a heck of a time putting a sentence together.
Yeah.
I would be more supportive of age limits. There's an age limit to get
Age
in.
limit.
Maybe there should be an age limit to leave.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's, maybe age limits. I mean, you have age limits. You can't be a general. I mean, if you're a general,
Or
what is a
judge on the Supreme Court is 70 right now, House Supreme Court, which is too young in my opinion.
I think,
All right.
I think in the armed services, what is it, 55 or 60 years old? You get to a certain age, you're out. Oh my God. It doesn't matter whether you're a third star or a 4 star, you have to get out. So we have some people in Congress that are senile, and they ought to be out of there. So I'm not sure how we get rid of them. Maybe it's age, maybe it's they serve a certain number of years, 18, 20 years, they're out.
Thank you. So this next question, 2 out of 3 here. What do you think would be the effects of publicly funded elections?
I'm 100% for that. We have got to take money out of politics. We have got to, I mean, it costs millions and millions of dollars anymore, and it's killing us. If there's one thing that's killing democracy, it's that. And I think public financing of campaigns is, I'm 100% for that, and I don't know if you can get congressmen to go along with it, but I've always been for that, always voted for it, always sponsored legislation on it, and we've got to take the sting out of lobbyists and special interest groups. If we were to do that, can you imagine the kind of legislation we could pass? I mean, gun control. I mean,
Yeah.
we'd get the guns off the street like that if we have public financing of campaigns. Like that. We'd take the sting away. We have public financing of campaigns. There wouldn't be any guns on the street.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I think with all the, I'm getting more and more concerned with the impact of all these super PACs, or any individual with billions of dollars. They can form their own PAC, and they could basically, the Senate campaign for J.D. Vance was funded and run by one wealthy, Silicon Valley person. They basically ran the campaign and funded it. And that plus the Trump endorsement was enough to elect J.D. Vance in the primary. So I'm very, very concerned about, and there's a group called Club for Growth that gets involved in a lot of these primaries, and they probably have a handful of funders, big funders. That's very troubling, and it's so hard, the way that the courts have interpreted our First Amendment, and I don't totally disagree with that, but it's a challenge to figure out how to address this problem. I mean, if you have some way, if a super PAC is involved in funding one candidate, then maybe the other candidate gets a certain amount of public funding or something like that. It's a challenge, though. You can't, right now in the First Amendment, you can't just say, you can't limit spending on the First Amendment. You're not allowed to by the courts. So it can only be voluntary that someone limits their spending. Like if they take the public money, then they limit their spending. That's all you can do. But it's becoming increasingly troubling, I think, the impact of big money on these races, and it's made worse by these multi-candidate primaries where a plurality wins. You can win with 30%, and so you got a bunch of candidates that are. I've seen a lot of state legislators, very competent people. Senator Lehner knows them, who've lost in their primaries because someone funded some other candidate that didn't have any legislative experience at all or ability to work. If you're a state legislator, you learn how to work and compromise usually, and then you go to Congress with those skills. But those folks are getting wiped out by the big bucks. It's a problem.
Thank you. All right, and now this is our final question of the evening. To what extent do you think the filibuster has changed over the last 30 to 40 years? And to what extent do you think the filibuster is responsible for failure to pass major legislation in the last 20 years? It's kind of like a legislative word problem.
Well, I'll just say, just to start, there's no, I mean, we all, I think you all are aware of this, but there's no question that the filibuster used to be used fairly rarely in very special occasions and not always for great purposes like against civil rights laws and that kind of thing by Southern senators. But now it's become just standard operating procedure now, so that, to get anything significant passed, you need 60 votes in the Senate. So it does make it far more difficult because the parties are so evenly matched and balanced. Rarely do they have that 60 votes to get around a filibuster. There's a couple exceptions to the filibuster, but they're with regard to Supreme Court, all court nominees, all executive appointments can be passed with just a majority. Now they can't be filibustered, and then the large budget resolution in which you could put anything having to do with money can also be passed majority. That can only be used like once a year. So the filibuster is there. And what was the second part of the question? I'm not sure I got that.
The second part of the question was, to what extent do you think the filibuster is responsible for the failure to pass major legislation in the last 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's an obstacle to pass major legislation. Now, he was in the House, not the Senate. The House doesn't have a filibuster.
Yeah. I have mixed emotions about it, to tell you the truth. I know that, there are times when I really would like to get rid of it. But then, if you get rid of it, then the other party in power they would use it in one way, we would use it in another way. I'm betwixt and between. I don't have a solid answer on that. I really don't.
Yeah, and just to amend that answer, there's no, the way that the Senate is comprised, it does require bipartisan compromise to get anything done. It just doesn't happen often.
Thank you.
And you might make the argument that if something is passed in a bipartisan way, it'll be more durable. It won't be repealed, the next Congress. So it's a complicated issue.
Thank you. Well, Ambassador Hall, thank you. Governor Taft, thank you. I am going to turn the reins back over to Chris Corba here.
Once again, Ambassador Hall, Governor Taft, thank you so much
When I was talking to Mark Willis about this a couple of months ago, we were talking about how no one speaks to each other respectfully anymore. And to sit in a room and to hear the two of you speaking the way that I personally wish everyone would speak, again, it soothed my soul. Thank you. What an amazing job you did moderating this evening. We truly appreciate everything that you've done, and thank you so much to the Dayton Daily News for the support that we've received for this event. And also, again, thank you to the Fitz Center for this beautiful facility. It's just wonderful. I don't have much to say right now because I know it's 8:30, and as I said, I'm going to turn into a pumpkin soon, as many of you are. But just some marching orders, all right? Vote. Okay. Vote, vote, vote. And
One time.
Yeah.
sorry, thank you. But bring other people with you, though. Get your children involved. Get your neighbors involved. We were at the Pride Festival this past weekend, and how many people who walked past and said, "Oh, I just don't vote. It doesn't matter." Well, it's not going to matter if you don't do it. Yeah. So please, that is your marching order from the League of Women Voters. And then second, if you liked this program, join us. Join us. We would love to have you be part of the League of Women Voters. And I have to say, I really like the retreat idea.
Yeah.
Actually, I was going to say that I think all new legislators should have to go through an orientation with the two of you. Funding to record you, and they have to sit there and they have to listen at a state park.
Yeah. Right. Or the state fair.
Okay, they'll come. All right, I just heard your basketball say they'll do it. All right. But thank you so much. Again, if you have questions about anything that is election related, please feel free to call the League of Women Voters. We are there to help. And enjoy the rest of your evening. And I hope you all feel as inspired to encourage our legislators to compromise and to work for the issues that are important to us, to you, whatever's important to you. Make sure that you vote for the person that addresses those issues. So thank you so much, everyone.